Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
So we are here to do a masterclass on children's healing stories.
Yes.
So welcome to if you're watching online, either live or later. Welcome if you're watching here. We are small but perfectly full. Although I hear footsteps coming up, maybe we should wait.
Well, I see David Heathfield on the line, and welcome, David. Your work with healing stories for children is really quite remarkable. So I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you for joining us. So our plan this morning was to tell some stories and I guess talk about our own experience of healing stories for children and what that means for us. We hadn't really decided what order we were going to start in.
Would you like to?
Shall I begin?
Yes.
Shall I begin? So yes, I guess just talking a little bit about my work with children's healing stories, and then I'll tell a story. I've been using stories working with come on in. Have a seat. Sorry, the camera's there, so you won't be in front of it. If you sit there, yeah, sit there, it's good. You haven't missed much, we just so yeah, I've been a lot of my career I've worked with children that are I would say on the edges of like society. They're kids that are being excluded, they're kids that are in sort of in the criminal justice system. And often the thing I find with stories is that they're often the first time a child like that hears storytelling is often the first time I'm telling it, because often they don't have access to those things. And sometimes a lot of the stories I tell, and I think a lot of the great stories are about outsiders. They're about people who don't quite fit in with society. And so for those children, stories are really important. And often I find that then once we've kind of told stories, that like we'll work on stories together, and the stories that they tell when they're able to explore things in a safe place, in a fable like space rather than in real life, some really interesting things come out. And I'll share a little bit more about that after I've told the story. So when I was thinking about healing stories, I was talking to Jim about it online. I remember the story that I was first told by a storyteller called Robin Hearn about 10 years ago. And it's such a beautiful story, and I'd completely kind of gone on the back burner, but when I remembered it, I knew it was the perfect story for this. And it's called The Candle Maker, and it goes like this. Once upon a time, quite a long time ago, in a land not too far from mine in England, there was a candle maker. And he was the most renowned candle maker. He made the most beautiful candles. Somehow he crafted them so that they shone the best light, the most amazing light. And people came from far and wide to buy his beautiful candles. There were merchants that came from far off lands. I hear that some of the candles even ended up in the souk here in America. And he was so well known that he became wealthy from his candle making. And he was able to buy a big house up on the hill outside the town where he lived. But what a lot of people didn't know was that the reason he was such a fine candle maker was because he was terrified of the dark. He was so scared of the dark that when he had this fine house with these many rooms, he would light every single room as if it was daylight. As soon as it became dusk, as soon as there was dark, he would go and he would light all of the candles. And then every night, before he went to bed, he would have to take his candle snuffer and put out every single candle, but he would always carry a big candelabra, so the light remained until the very last, and then he would put it down at his bedside at night. And when he couldn't keep his eyes open any longer, he would blow out the candle and he would sleep fitfully in the dark. And he'd only been in this new fine house a few weeks, and he started noticing that when he put out the last candle at night, there was a noise. It was a very strange noise. It went shh, and it seemed like something was disappearing under the door. And to begin with, he tried to brush it off, and he thought, oh, maybe it's a mouse or a spider just disappearing. But it grew more persistent. Night by night, that noise, every time the last candle was out in each room, just a definite movement. and a definite movement underneath the door. And it grew in him so that it was a fear that he had to face. He thought it is better to know what it is than grow even more fear. So the very next night when he'd made that decision, as he put out the last candle in each room, he heard the noise. He noticed the thing going underneath the door, this strange shadow-like thing. And he noticed the direction that it went. And in each room, when those shadows came out of the room, they went to one place where he never went. They went to the room where the stairs to the cellar were, because that was the darkest room, and he was so afraid of the dark. But that night, taking all his courage and just one small candlelight, he went and he stood at the top of the stairs that went down to the cellar, and he watched these strange shadow-like creatures going down the cellar steps, coming from each room, all the way down into the bottom of the cellar. As he stood there, holding his just tiny candlelight, those noises formed into voices. He heard the voices saying, "Good evening, Brother Shadow. Good evening, Sister Shadow." And when the last of those shadow-like things had gone into the cellar, he stood there frozen. He couldn't move. And then he heard one voice speak out and say, "We gather to hear our stories. Brother Shadow, what did you do today?" And then the candlemaker at the top of the stairs heard another voice say, "Today, I went out from this place, and I went down into the town. And when I went into the town, I went to the richest parts of the town, and I went to the poorest parts of the town. And there, behind one door, I heard voices raging, arguing, a man and a woman shouting at one another. And between those noises, I heard a whimpering, a child's voice. And so I crept under the door of that place, and I went past those arguing people, and I went up the stairs, and I came to a cupboard. And I heard the whimpering coming from behind the cupboard. And I slipped my shadow self underneath that door. And there was a child whimpering and crying. And so I stretched myself up onto the ceiling of that cupboard. And I danced. I danced myself into beautiful shapes, into stories, into princesses and castles. And the child, he stopped his whimpering and he looked up at me. He got lost in my stories. And he stayed there with me, and I stayed there dancing with him until his parents' rage had subsided. And finally, the boy slept. And then, brother and sister shadows, I came back to this place. And the candlemaker heard the first voice say again, "Thank you, brother Shadow. And you, sister Shadow, tell me what you did today." And then he heard another voice. And this voice said, I left this place too. I left this place in the early hours of the morning, and I too went on the road into town. But I went into the artist's quarters, into the place where the musicians and the storytellers and the poets and painters live. And when I went into the place where the painters live, I saw, sat at the window, an artist. And his head was in his hands, and his belly was hungry. So I slipped under the door of that place, and I went into his studio where the canvases had been abandoned. And I saw the first ray of sunlight come through the window where he was sitting. And when I saw it, I stretched myself up into it. And I danced. I danced myself into beautiful shapes and patterns and things to inspire that artist. And he looked at me flickering in that sunlight. He stepped away from the window and he picked up his brushes. And he began to finish those canvases that he'd started. And I stayed there dancing for him in that sunlight until his canvases were finished and he was ready to take them to market to sell. And then I too came back here. And the candlemaker heard the first voice say again, "Thank you, Sister Shadow." And you, Brother Shadow, what did you do today? And he heard another voice. And the voice said, I went from this place in the early afternoon, and I went on that road into town, but I went to the park. And in the park, I saw a young mother pushing a pram, and the baby crying and mewling, and the mother so tired, her face worn, pushing the pram backwards and forwards, trying to get the baby to sleep. And so I crept over the wheel of that pram and up into the cradle and up into the canopy above the pram. And I danced. I danced into shapes and danced with the light, and the baby stopped his crying and he looked up at me. He giggled and he murmured. And the mother, pushing the pram, smiled. And knowing that she could stop pushing that pram for a minute, sat down on the bench and she rested. And I stayed there dancing with that baby in the light until she was recovered. She could return home. And then I too returned to this place. And the candle maker heard the first voice say again, thank you, Brother. And as the shadows continued their stories to one another, the candle maker, he crept away. And he went all the way up the stairs back to his bed. And that night, when he put the candle next to him, he blew it out without fear. He slept the most peaceful night he had of his entire life. And there ends the story of it. Thank you. Thank you. You're allowed to. Thank you so much for listening to that. I love that story because the idea that the dark can be a place of healing for us feels really important. And I suppose that's one of the things I wanted to say about the work that I do with children. A lot of the children that I spoke about before, they've experienced a level of darkness in their life that we wouldn't want children to experience. Sometimes, it's been something that they perpetrated. Sometimes it's things that have been done to them. And hey, Norman, just have a seat. I'm just talking about.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
You will be on camera, but you can leave. And so I think it's really important that in the stories there is a level of darkness in the stories that they can relate to. I think for me, the most moving experience, I was talking to Jim about this before, that I worked with a teenager. I think he must have been about 15, and he was on remand for a violent crime which involved gangs. And to begin with, it was really hard to engage with him, as you can imagine. Like, a child like that, and stories seem just so kind of far away from each other. So I chose stories that kind of had a lot of violence, had a lot of death in them, because as we know, stories do. And it took him a while to realize, I think something about that made him realize, okay, maybe there is a place for me in these stories. And I think for me, the most moving thing was that then when we worked together for him to create his own story, he created these incredible stories that were, that the story, because it was to do with gangs, the gangs that he was in trouble for being against, it's the best way of putting it. In his stories, they worked together. He created stories in which the gangs all worked together against the man, was his words. And for me, that was just really moving, because actually what was happening in his life and what somewhere where his heart was were two very different things. So yeah, that's my that's my takeaway, that creating stories where people who wouldn't normally see themselves in it and are able to express things that they couldn't. For me, that's kind of what healing is about. I think that's kind of enough of me for the moment. And welcome.
So we are growing here locally, and there's a couple of you online as well. My name is Jim Boulay. I'm from New York, but that doesn't mean the city. I actually live about 5 minutes walk from several hundred acres of old growth forest, and that's where I like to spend my time. And the work that I do with children is usually in the context of a family. I don't really do a lot of direct work with kids by themselves. Um, I'll share a little bit of my background, and that is I started out as a family therapist. So that was, there was always a child involved, usually a teenage boy or a girl. And then my life took some very interesting turns. And I work now in a variety of settings. I work in with the incarcerated persons. I work with folks. I'm a chaplain in a hospital, and I specialize in trauma and oncology, so cancer. So I spend a lot of time there. I'm a death doula, so I work with people and their families as they approach the end of their lives. And so the work I do is mostly in the context of families, but there are always children involved. And I'll say one thing about my kind of assumptions about that, and then share a story and go from there. And that is, when I was being trained as a family therapist, the first thing we were taught in this particular method of working was that you will never understand what's going on in a family. It's beyond your ability to understand and know. That the people have come to you because they're in pain. And probably you're their last resort. They've tried other things before and they haven't worked. So they're coming to you to say, we're in pain and we need help. But oh, by the way, we've tried everything and nothing works. You're not going to be any more help to us. That's kind of the basis. And so our approach was to say, well, we can only do one thing. We can do two. We can listen to you with an open heart, and that was necessary. But the one effect we can have is we can make you more uncomfortable. And if we're doing it in a skillful and open-hearted way, then it will allow you to leave what you're doing and discover a new path. But we won't know what it is. It's not our job to know that. And if we think we're doing that, then you're in trouble. So my whole kind of attitude is to open spaces for things to happen and to create a container of love and concern and listening, but to say, I don't have any answers, literally. That's all I can do is make an opportunity. So let me create the space.
So, yeah, in creating space, I'm gonna move over there.
Go right ahead. So just so you kind of know my foundational assumptions. The story I'd like to share is not the one I talked to you about. So, you know, there's this wonderful saying that the Kalahari have, which is to tell the story that pursues you. I walked up here and this story reached out and grabbed me, so I have to tell them. And this is from the Kabylia people, which is a part of Algiers. And it was taught to me by Rebecca Lemaire, who is my colleague and with whom I wrote a book on stories for healing, stories of the heart. It comes from a time when there had never been death. People lived, and there were old people and there were young people, but nobody ever died. And somehow it worked. And it was what everybody was used to. And then this terrible thing happened. And there was a war. And in this war, of course, people died. And there was one young boy. Let's call him Ahmed. And he was the first orphan. He was the first child to lose his parents. And he was lonely, and he was sad, and he was angry, and he was filled with all these emotions, and he didn't know what to do with them. Because people around him didn't know people who had died. And so he took to wandering in the fields, especially at night. He liked to wander in the fields at night. And it didn't really give him any answers, but at least he wasn't in the house where his parents used to live. And so one night he was wandering in the fields, and again he felt these emotions rising in him and almost stifling him. And there in the sky was Grandmother Moon. And she looked down on Ahmed and she recognized the pain that he felt. And she wanted to help. And so she came down to him and she said, you know, all those feelings in you, they're really a great river. And if you will learn to cry, then the river can flow. And Ahmed was, first of all, very touched that this wonderful being should come down from the sky and hope to comfort him. But he said, what is crying? I don't know. And she said, come here. And she said, close your eyes. And she wrapped her arms around him. She said, let those feelings rise. Let those feelings rise and feel them as a river. And they will rise and they will rise and they will spill out of your eyes. And he stood there in her embrace. The first tear appeared, and then another tear appeared, and then great rivers of tears came out. And when he was done for that time, she pulled back and he looked at her and she was covered with the drops of his tears that formed the moon's face that we see. And she said, now that you know how to cry, you have to go teach others. You have to teach others that they too can let their feelings rise and let them spill out. But you must always remember, be ready to move.
Wonderful.
So, much like you've encountered people who had challenging experiences, a lot of the work that I do is with people who, and I'm thinking of two, I'll share two, two other kinds of losses. And one is there was a woman who was had just given birth, and her baby was not going to live. It had a very, very aggressive brain cancer at birth. And they called me up to help the family because they were trying to decide how much effort to put into this, when clearly there was not going to be any medical cure to this. And in my chaplaincy, I don't work in a particular faith tradition. I work with everyone who comes to me. And this particular family was Catholic. And they wanted their baby baptized. I understood. But because of the massive surgery that this baby was undergoing, they couldn't let a priest into the surgery. Now, you don't have to be a priest to baptize someone in this tradition. You don't have to be in the same room. It's just what people are used to. But the family was adamant that a priest go in and baptize this young baby. And this terrible thing happened. They found a priest. And the priest came in and he said to the family, if you'll pray hard enough, your baby will be okay. And of course, that wasn't true. And so I had to sit with the mother and hold her like the move and let her weep because she knew that this was what was going to happen. And I can just tell you, it was one of them that stayed with me for many, many years. And I saw her some weeks later. Her child had passed, of course. And she was in the hospital on a visit to a friend. And she saw me in the hall and she thanked me. And I thanked her to have been so brave as to let me into that terrible, terrible space that she was in. The other one I just want to mention is I work in jails and prisons as well. And trying to keep this short. In the prison system, one of the things you can do if you wish is to say, I am this religion or I am that religion. You can choose which religion you are. And there's a big demand to call yourself Jewish. Now, that might be surprising, except that if you're Jewish, you get kosher food. And it's not that the kosher food is any better. It's usually worse, but it comes wrapped in plastic. And you know that nobody has spit in your food. So, well, a lot of what I was doing was helping people arrange to be Jewish. And I was, it was an administrative thing. I said, I can't convert you. It's against the law. In Jewish law, to convert someone against their will, and you're not freely choosing when you're in prison. So it's impossible.
So you're nothing short of a criminal, Jim, is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Of the best kind.
The best kind. Proudly. So I had one fellow who was Jewish. And he had committed some pretty serious crimes. And he came in to one of our little sessions. I work with groups at times. And he said, I realized that the problem is that my soul is just filthy. That I have a diseased soul. And that's why I'm doing all these things. And I said, if you want to be Jewish, you can't say that. Because your soul is always pure. Maybe we call it schmutz. Maybe it's some stuff on top of it that needs to be scraped off, but your soul is always pure. And he looked at me and he said, so that means I'm responsible for what I do? And I said, if you want to be Jewish. And he burst into tears. Again, I hadn't told him what to do. But I created this space for him to say,
Yeah.
how do I look at the world differently? So not so much to do with kids, but it has everything to do with the way I work with.
And it reminds me, I did a work in prisons with John Rowe, and we were teaching prisoners storytelling so that they could tell stories to their children when they came into. So something really healing about that, about having something to connect with your children that you could do, and even like on phone calls, that wasn't to do with where they were. It felt kind of really important. And again, some beautiful stories that they created and beautiful stories that we could share. And do we have anyone else here? Is it still just us?
You and me.
Yeah, I suppose so just because we were reflecting, weren't we, about one of the titles we were given for this was sort of building resilience and children's healing through resilience. And actually, it's kind of quite a contentious thing because part of what we want to create is a resilient system around the children, and I think that's what sort of the prison work that I was talking about did. It's not so much about sort of feel like they're children, they're just allowed to be children rather than trying being resilient to things. But how can we create resilience in that community so that they are supported to be children? And I think the prisons work was, really, really beautiful in that. It was John and I kind of sharing traditional stories and getting the prisoners to tell their own stories and sharing them. And I suppose, a couple of stories from that really stick with me. And this might be just up for discussion because I think it's really interesting. I told a story that was from Malawi, I believe. And I know there's kind of lots of issues around telling stories cross-culturally, but what happened was there was a woman in there. I think she had children, but it's about kind of children in the sense that it was connected with her father. And I asked her before I told her, I said, this is a story that I've read that I would really like to tell because I would like to know how it feels to somebody from that culture. And she gave me what remains the best compliment I have ever had on my storytelling. When I'd finished, she said, "You tell it like my grandmother told it," which was just amazing. And I think, and it really, for me, changed, it's like, because I'd taken the story and changed it from what was written down, but I'd done it in a way that it was about how do I connect with people with it. And I think there's an essence as a storyteller that if you tell something with respect to that culture and with honor to it, and you tell it from the heart, then it connects. But more than that, because the compliment's not the most important thing. Because of hearing that, she went to the prison library and she asked them to get the books of the other stories that were kind of in that culture. And then she got in touch with her father and went back to him and said, tell me the stories that, that I knew. So, that's the important bit. The compliments just me kind of, oh, that's not. But the important bit is about kind of reconnecting. And I think that's what stories do. There's a sense of healing about that, and again, and that if you believe in this kind of thing. So for me, the thing that I knew that this is like the most healing thing, and rainbows are very healing anyway. And John tells a lovely story, the Ribbon Maiden, some of you know it. Where at the end of it, the Ribbon Maiden goes across the sky, and that's what makes the rainbow. And we just told that story. It was the last story of the project. We were telling in a women's prison. And as we left that room, kind of all feeling like amazing, such an incredible experience. These women had these stories to tell to their children. We walked out of the room, and everybody, it was sort of an open prison. It was like lots of green space. And there were lots of women out, and they were looking up at the sky. And we came out of the room, and we looked up at what they were looking at, and there was a double rainbow. It was just magical. So something in the universe was responding to our healing. So I just wanted to share that sort of prison stuff.
And you talked about resilience. And another fundamental assumption I had is that healing is always reciprocal, and healing is always or best accomplished in community. You can't be a family therapist and think one person has a problem. You realize there's a system involved, but it's the system that goes beyond the family. It's who's supporting the family, who are they interacting with. And the minute you start to do that kind of thinking, it's easy to get overwhelmed because what are the limits of this system that needs to adapt to help this person or this family. But I think a lot of the work that storytelling does that allows for that is that storytelling creates community. We are a community here in this room because we've been listening to stories and telling stories, and momentarily I hope we'll be discussing as well.
Yes.
But that's the function of story. It doesn't just of healing stories. It doesn't transmit a history per se. It doesn't teach a particular lesson. It builds community. And the best healing stories I know are the ones that leave the space for everyone listening to hear their own story. And that's a special kind of story and a special kind of skill to do that, but it's achievable. Come on. And I'm going to get a little nerdy for a moment. Maybe
I'm good with nerdy. Dive in.
Open it up. You know, resilience is a word that's used a lot, and it's, I think, overused.
I would agree.
But I'd like to give you a larger context for the word and introduce you to a word that resonates. I don't like the word, but its meaning resonates with me. And so if you think in terms of systems, you say a system is headed in a certain direction, whatever that may be. You argue about how to define that, but you know, the system has momentum, it's moving in a certain direction. And then from time to time, what happens is there's an outside force that has an impact on that system. Now, some systems, when that happens, we call them fragile systems. They break. They stop functioning, they fall apart, or they get stuck. There's any number of ways that a system that's fragile becomes unhealthy when it has this outside influence. So there's one. So we have fragile systems. We also have robust systems. And robust systems have so many resources within their bounds that when there's a perturbance of that, it's got the resources. It doesn't have to even think about what to do differently. Oh, we know we've got this, we'll call on this. You know, it's robust. So the impact, it's felt, but it doesn't even come close to pushing it off course. Then we have resilient systems. So there's fragile, there's robust, and resilient. And if you think of a system for this moment as an arrow trying to get somewhere, this outside impact comes and it throws it off course. But then it finds its way back. And it eventually returns to its original course. And that's what we call a resilient system. There's a fourth kind of system that doesn't get talked about. It's studied a great deal. If you're an academic, you'll love this. It's called an anti-fragile system. And an anti-fragile system, when it encounters that outside impact, finds a new course altogether. And that's what healing is about. Healing is not about returning to normal. Once we've been wounded, once we've been injured, we have a new normal that we have to discover. And that injury never goes away.
Yeah.
It transforms us, hopefully in an anti-fragile way and not a fragile way. But we will be transformed. And that's what's needed. I agree. There's so much, there's so much emphasis on resilience because, well, we can power through anything. No. Let yourself be changed. Let the system around you be changed. Find a new path, because don't throw away all the beauty that comes from this terrible thing that's happened. That's not to say it was good. It's not to say there was a greater purpose in that trauma. But there is a greater opportunity that can present itself if those of us who can allow that to happen. And I think that's our particular responsibility as storytellers, is to create those opportunities for people to say, once upon a time means I can imagine another world. So let's imagine another world.
Lovely. I'm just reflecting now. I really feel how important that anti-fragile system you first told me about. It's like, for me, it's like quite personal. But what's so important about talking to people about that anti-fragile system is otherwise you might be there, but you might feel like it's a failure. So if you're not getting back to your previous path, you're not getting back to your previous normal, what can actually stop you embracing that is feeling like you should be. So it's really important to have that full system so that people who actually would be on that path are able to see that opportunity rather than just seeing it as a failure to be back where they were, a failure to be resilient, failure to be robust. It's so important that and like you say, as storytellers, that once upon a time we create a world where we can speak about that, where it can be different and it's new and it's changed. That's really important. Shall we open
Yes.
this up to
Yeah.
questions, discussions? Yeah.
I have a question because, it came from what you just said. What happens when the wound is your refuge? Where you restore yourself to the wound because that's where your comfort zone is, or your knowledge zone is. Kind of people speaking from experience.
Yeah. I think.
Help me, please.
Yeah.
But the thing is, yeah, that's what I'm hearing is that when you go to resilience or anti-resilience.
Yeah.
What is part of the so-called resilience?
I mean, I can tell you from my sort of instinct to respond to that is that actually some of it's time. I think sometimes you need to sit in the wound. I had a lovely quote many years ago, and I'm going to try and remember it. It's like I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it's something like that. When you're wounded, when there's a wound, let the salt run through it and the birds sing in the hole. So yeah, birds remind me of that. So that it's like there's a place to be in that.
Yeah.
And then I feel like when you're ready, again, it's that it not being a failure, being where you are and experiencing that, so that you then, okay, I'm ready to move at that time, and allowing that not to be a failure, because I think sometimes the idea that I shouldn't be doing this actually keeps you in it. That was my kind of response to that. Jim, do you want to?
Yeah, I think when we're wounded, and it's a big wound, there is a refuge that's available there. And one of the big problems that can arise is when people say you're spending too much time there. You should be over this by now.
Like when anyone says should, we just.
Yeah, that's right. But people ingest that, people feel that, and they say, oh, I'm doing something wrong. I think so long as the wound is providing you with comfort, genuine comfort, then it's serving a purpose. When you find that you're losing relationships or whatever other problems are coming along because you're dwelling in your wound, well, then let that discomfort help you move on. But I don't think there's anything right or wrong about embracing the wounds we have. It is a matter of not just timing, because I want to say one, I'm sorry. Healing doesn't finish.
Yeah.
You're never healed. You are always healing. Unless, God forbid, you should be fragile and you can't even figure out how to continue the healing. But that's kind of our job. Healing is a process that never ends. And as long as we think of, oh, I'm healed of that, well, not yet, and not ever, because healing is a good thing that happens to us. It transforms us. It doesn't cure us. It allows us to be someone different. And if we're fortunate enough, we keep changing year after year after year. So.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does, and when you say, and the cure, the seeking of the cure sometimes is a judgment of other people. You're not cured or you have to be cured. But what I would like to give to you is that a long time ago, when I was working for an environmental group and they had a garden, I had a compost heap and 3 bins, and nobody wanted to take care of it because it's lots of work. But I became obsessed with making it work. Dumping the stuff, and I dug up the pathway so I had the carbon rich material. I was obsessed. But years later, when I was no longer there, I wondered why, how, what was happening.
Yeah.
And I realized now, I think, is that what I was after is disintegration. Taking things that break down to their essential components, garbage, crap, you name it.
Yeah.
And then out of that, there's energy. And I still have no idea what I'm doing with that breakdown material, but it was there, it was. And besides, we got a lot of good things out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Norman.
Yeah, in other words, breakdown.
Yeah.
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 Yes.
So,
Oh,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, wait till you guys are finished.
No, go ahead.
No, I need a space.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm afraid I can't do that, sitting down and telling thing. I'm
Oh,
like
sure.
you on my feet, I'm afraid. Were you so?
Oh, did we want to have,
It's all about.
well, yeah, let's get the question.
should we do the questions?
And then,
I'm sorry, yeah.
yeah,
I
okay.
thought you were finished.
No,
No, no. So was there another question? Yeah. Go.
I really value personal stories in building that sentiment of anti-fragility, but something that I keep coming back to is it's easy to talk about scars.
Mm.
It's difficult to talk about wounds.
Mhm.
And I think personally, whilst I know that if I'm able to talk about my wounds as a story, then I can heal better. But I've not been able to detach emotion and do that in a way that it feels like a story. So I'm kind of removed from it. I'm wondering, in your experience, how do I go about that? How should I even attempt? Or let's make stories about scars and not make stories about wounds.
So my question is, are you telling kind of first person stories from life experience rather than kind of mythologized versions? That's right. Shall I? And then.
Yeah, you and.
Yeah, I suppose for myself, when I've kind of created stories around things that are wounds, and actually I might end this, I've got a story that I created which might be helpful with that, if we have time. For me to talk about wounds, it helps me to, rather than speaking first person about the direct thing, to create kind of a mythology around it, to create fables around it. So there are kind of mermaid stories that I've created. So I kind of have a connection with that idea of the mermaids kind of seeming like one thing above the surface and being something different below. So for me, the places to explore those is to almost take that story, that personal story, and create it as if it's a fairy story, putting it in that different world, as if it's kind of a fable or tale, because it makes it easier to really get into those kind of places that are wounds rather than scars. So that would be my take on it, and something that I've done that's helpful.
Yeah, and I'll elaborate a little bit. Because when I had a school for teaching this kind of storytelling for several years. And the hardest story to tell in this mode is a personal story. Because remember, the purpose of a story is to open up new possibilities and new worlds. And when you're telling a story where you know the facts, it's very difficult to step away from it. You have to give it room to breathe, let it show you things you hadn't thought of. But if you're telling your story, that's almost impossible to do. It can be done, but it's a real work of art to be able to do that. And I don't think that's necessary. I think saying, I'm going to tell a story that reminds me internally of my wounds. It doesn't have to be a story about the same kind of wound, but it brings that feeling to me. Well, then I can tell that story and I can start to open up that possibility for me as well as the people listening. I have a story I tell that is a very particular story. It's completely mythological. And there's a moment in it where the protagonist, who's this young girl, feels tremendously alone and is frightened. And I cannot tell that story without weeping at that moment. That's not my wound, but it touches my wound. And so I know that people are moved by that story, but you can tell I'm moved even just remembering it. All right. And that's a good thing, because it means I'm never going to stop growing from what happened. So that would be my suggestion, is that find a story or stories that speak emotionally and spiritually to your wound, but don't necessarily name it, you know? And I think you'll be surprised at the things that can come.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, so for the OCU that were here for the Candle Maker story, the moment I was saying to Jim, the moment that I normally cry when I'm telling it, like not to other people, is the moment where the shadow goes underneath the door and dances for the boy in the cupboard. That feeling of the other people raging somewhere else and feeling so alone and something coming and dancing. So it really touches that kind of loneliness wound in me of like wishing that had happened. Do you know what I mean? So you kind of, and I like, today's the first time I've told it without crying. I'm very proud of myself, you know, but then like, Mother Moon, how do you so I think actually often we're drawn to the stories that speak of those wounds that, you know, are still really in the midst of that healing, you know. So I think that's definitely true for a lot of things that I tell. And I can tell where the wound is for that moment when you kind of go, can't not cry here, you know. So yeah, does that answer?
Well, let me add one more thing.
Yeah.
There is a real value in telling the story of your wound, but it's not a storytelling value. It's a personal growth value, and that's there. I don't want to diminish that at all. But if you're going to use stories to work on that, and I think it's a wonderful thing to do, then they have to be a story that is resonant but not, you know, directly reflective.
Thank you.
Yes.
Could I,
Yes.
you just seems about crying and being proud of yourself and not crying. I would say sometimes if somebody shows tears
Yeah,
when they're doing it, that takes the story to a totally different level
yeah,
and it connects bodily.
yeah,
I know, I work as a psychotherapist and there've been times when I was a student, I was taught you must be very sort of detached and, you know, you're a blank screen.
yeah.
And a lady once told me a really, I won't tell the story, horrendous story of her suffering. And I was trying not to cry, really trying not to cry the whole time. And then
Yeah.
eventually I couldn't stop myself. I had tears. I wasn't making a noise, but I had tears and I kept going like this. Yeah, so how do you feel? I don't think I said that, but what happened weeks later when we'd ended our therapy, I said, so what was it about our therapy that worked for you? And she said, it was the moment that you cried.
Yeah,
I felt for the first time ever that what happened to me was witnessed
yeah,
by someone who really got it,
yeah,
got my pain. That she said that was healing.
yeah. I think it really is when you're hearing people's stories, and I had that the boy that I talked about earlier. You know, when he told me his story to getting into that position, and I could not feel something about that because, you know, it was part of me went, yeah, I'd be where you are. I really feel, you know, and that I think that thing of witnessing people and then feeling that you feel is really important. I know with that particular story, it's because I always cried before the bit that like I wanted to like everyone else to experience it. How are we doing?
But-
I think we only have about 5 more minutes.
Yeah, no,
I don't know how long we have.
we have 2 hours.
2 hours.
Oh, do we?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
no, we're doing.
But there's a number of
between 4
people.
people.
Yes.
Well, but who else is listed? Because we may have a different list. Yep, yes.
And yeah.
Okay, we thought it was Rona Leventhal. So,
And that happens so often. I'm going to insist that she changes her name.
Yeah.
okay,
You should be running first.
so who else have we, no, but who else have we missed? Because we want to make. it for everyone.
So you're going to tell in Arabic. Do we
Yeah.
have anyone that can translate?
I can try,
Okay,
but my English is not very good. عندي لي قصة بالعربية؟ سعيد بابا
let me say one more thing. and then we'll leave it.
لا ولكن غير الإنجليزية شوية عندي ضعيفة.
We are a community and we will, I'm sure, have a wonderful experience.
I just wanted to share a little experience
Okay,
in jail prison
Yeah.
with women I work some time, I make a rehearsal with them, some exercise, and one time, because I feel them very near, we will feel close, and after exercise, each one of them talk about her, why she's in prison, and all of them talk about their mother, that they miss their mother. And I told them one time, you know, me, I lose my mother, I was very young, and I lose my mother. And they were so, oh, you also have a pain? But they didn't express, but I feel that they feel. And that's when I go, when I went, they say, I cry for your mother.
Yeah.
I just want to make one last comment.
Yes,
And then we'll
yes.
turn it over. And that is about crying when you're telling the show. And the container that you're in is what really determines that. When we're leading a workshop, the purpose is not, the first purpose is not to bring healing to all of you, although I think that's always going on, but it's to convey information to you and examples. So there's a benefit in holding back some emotions. That's at one extreme. And at the other extreme, we have the people who get up and emote for stories, and they're taking care of themselves, they're not taking care of their listeners. And that's at another extreme. And I think our challenge is to be able to walk flexibly in that middle ground where we show emotion. It's genuine, it's not a show, but we reveal it. And we know when to pull back and when to show more. And it's a dance. And there's not a right way or wrong way, except to say that if you're only taking care of yourself, then you've gone too far. You can go in either direction.
Yeah.
You're not crying because I'm strong and I'm not going to do that. Okay, you've gone too far.
Yeah.
But anyway, so let's move to our next. And by the way, to Rona and you, we didn't know how this was going to pan out, and we thought we were the only ones going to be here. So well, no, so
There's 4 names on the schedule.
well, we didn't hear from you. So
That's okay.
so we're happy to invite you in. I just want to help you understand how we came to this moment, and now we'll move forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't know, shall we, is that all right?
Sure, of course,
Lovely. All right.
I'm just wondering if we have a new Darija speaker. Would you be able to translate for us? Are you a Darija speaker? Okay, yes. Should I look downstairs and think?
Would you like to have a
Yeah, but my English is not that good.
His English is
Much better than my.
Yeah.
His English is very good. So, you know what to do, when she finishes a sentence, you then do, and then she starts again, and you, okay, you can do this.
قلت لك عاد بحال هكا يا تهضر واحد شويه
شحال فيها من وقت شحال؟ It's very short, 5-6 minutes.
Donc, je me présente. Soukaina, je suis marocaine. J'habite à Fès. Aujourd'hui, je vais raconter une histoire en arabe.
I present myself, I'm Soukaina, living in Fez, and today I will tell you a story in dialect, Moroccan dialect.
كنحتاج كنحبق وكاس سوسن حاجة اللي من بين العدنان عليه أفضل الصلاة والسلام. حكايتي السيدي فيها حكمة الصغار وفهمها زايدة الكبار، وكيف قالوا ناس زمان اللي تجلس معاه في المايدة وما تدي منه فايدة رفاقته غير زاد، واللي بغى يسمع لحكايتي يقرب لقبالتي. قلت يا سيادي غادي تكون على واحد المرأة اللي ولدت 7 ديال الأولاد. 7 ديال الأولاد.
And translate. Alors, approchez. Bon, c'est some expression, especially in stories. Come on, everybody, come on. Come on to listen to my story.
The story is about a woman that have 7 children.
But people who want this story can be good for children and for adults. Children, it will be joy, and for adults, it will give them something more.
هاد السيدة ما كانش كتولد البنات، واخا ولادها كانوا باغيينها تولد بنت.
This woman don't have like a girl, but she want a girl.
داكشي اللي طرا غيجيب ليا، وديك السيدة غادي تحمل ولادها. غيقول لها امي نهار تولدي الا ولدتي بنت غادي تشيري لينا بالسبنين، وإلا ولدتي ولد تشيري لنا بالمنجل. دازت ليا، وديك السيدة غيجي نهار غادي تولد.
This woman wants boy. She has only girls. And one time she came pregnant. And the children say, if you have a boy, you will let something. And if you have a girl, something else.
داكشي اللي طرا غادي نهار غادي تولد، وغادي تجي تقابلها وغتقول لها ديك السيدة شوفي إلا ولدت البنت شيري لولادك السبنين، وإلا ولدت البنت شيري لولادك بالمنجل. ديك السيدة غادي يقدر الله وغادي تولد بنيتها، ولكن ديك القابلة غادي تقول لولادها راها ولدت بنت وغادي تشير ليهم بالمنجل.
And then she has a baby. It is a girl. But the woman was with her. She said, I will tell them that you have a boy.
الولاد ما عجبهمش الحال، وقرروا يخويو قبيلة وما بقاوش فيها.
All her children were not happy, so they decide to leave the village. The village.
دازت ليا، وديك البنت غادي تبدا تخرج، كبرت والناس القبيلة غادو يحايلوها. هذيك الودعة تلفتي 7 ديال الولاد، هذيك الودعة تلفتي 7 ديال الولاد، يعني ما بقاوش في قبيلة.
And after time, some years later, this young girl became a teenager, and everybody tell her, "Oh, because of you, all your brothers left the village. You are a bad girl."
واحد النهار داك البنت غادي تقلق وغادي تغضب، وغادي تقصد امها باش تسولها علاش الناس كيقولوا لها ديك الهضره. امها غادي تعاود لها الحكايه ديال خوتها واشترا. ديك البنت قررت انها غادي تلبس وتحزم وترزم وتخرج تقلب على خوتها فين ما كانوا. شي اللي جا لبسها باها وقادتها ودار لها 100 حجاب، وصفتها مع واحد العبد هو ومرته، حيت هذا شحال كان العبد كيكون المراه والراجل، وصفتوها معاه.
She saw the girl decide with her parents to leave. Her father give her an esclave with her. She decided to leave the village looking for her brother.
مشات مع ديك العبد هو ومرته، وركبت على واحد العود ومشى. بقاو غاديين حتى وصلوا واحد البلاصه فيها العيون. غيشد ديك العبد وغيغطس مرته في العين البيضاء، وديك البنت غيغطسها في العين الكحله.
And so she went with an esclave, with the esclave and her wife. And one time they arrived at a place where
A lake, small lake.
small lakes, a white lake and a black lakes. And he put the slave put one woman, his wife, in a white lakes, and the young girl in the black lakes.
بقاو غاديين حتى وصلها عند خوتها. المشكل اللي طرا ان فاش مرت خوها سمعتها بلي غطسوها في العين الكحله، يسحب لها هي العبد، وبقاو كيحقروا عليها ويصيفطوها كتسرح الجمال. من طلوع النهار حتى نزل الظلام. وداكشي اللي جرى ديك البنت كانت كتمشي حدا داك الجمال وكتبقى تشكي وتبكي وتقول ليهم جمال با ما تاكلوا ما تشربوا، العبد ولا حر والحرة ولا تأبدى وترجع للدار، عاوتاني ما يعطيوها لا تاكل لا تشرب ويصيفطوها بوحديتها. كيجي لا غدا وتجمع ديك الجمال وتجلس تبقى عليهم ديك الجمال ما تاكلوا ما تشربوا، الخادم ولا حر والحرة ولات خادم، وديك الجمال كيتجمعوا حداها وتا هما كيبقاو كيبكيو.
The young girl become like slaves. Become like, and everybody was not good with her, and she was only speaking with camels.
ايوا غيشوفها واحد النهار واحد السارح وغيمشي يقصد خوها الكبير وغيقول لهم ديك السيده راها كتجمع الجمال وكتبقى تشكي وتبكي عليهم وهما ما كياكلوا ما كيشربوا، راها طلقه عليهم الجوع.
And one time, someone who knew her brother told him, there is a girl talking with camels, and she doesn't give them to eat.
خوها السارح غيمشي عند خوها وغيقول لها اشجره الا ما تيقتينيش اجي لغدا وشوف اختك بعينيها. وداك الشيء طلع لبس وتحزم وترزم ومشى لغدا مع السارح باش يشوف اش طرا، ولقى حقا باللي اختو كتجلس تبكي وتشكي على داك الجمال هما ما كياكلوش.
And that's what happened. The brother come and saw that his sister was crying and speaking with camels, and camels didn't eat.
ويا سيدي خوها غيقصدها ويقول لها اش طارك، وهي غتقول له اش كاين اش كاين اش كاين، ولا رجعها لديك العيون وغطت خوها سمرتو في العين الكحله وهي غطسها في العين البيضاء.
So when he saw that, her brother went with her to the lakes and put her in the white lake and the other woman in the black lake.
غيجي نهار وخوتها غيقدروا يتجمعوا هما وعيالاتهم، ولكن نويساتها بغاو يديروا لها المكيده. بغاو يديروا لها المكيده وغيديروا لها البيضه ديال الحنش في الطعام. غيديروا لها البيضه ديال الحنش في الطعام وغيقولوا ليها اللي كلا القمر الاولى راه عزيز عليه خوته. داكشي اللي طرا هي كلات ديك المعلقه ومع الوقت داك البيضه ديال الحنش في كرشها بقات غاديه كتكبر حتى ولات بحال حامله. وهنا لويساتها غيمشيو عند خوتهم وغيقولوا لهم اختك راها ولات حامله وما عرفناش مين جابت هذا الكرش.
And the wife of her brother were jealous, and they prepare some plate to eat, and they put eggs from snake, and they told her, take it is very good for you. But when she eats that, she become pregnant, and the girls went to their husband and tell them, look, your sister is pregnant.
داكشي اللي طرا خوها غادي يجي وغادي يديها لوسط واحد الغابه وغيقول لها بقاي تما تسنايني حتى نجي، وبقات هي النهار كله هي كتسناه من طلوع النهار حتى نزول الظلام خوها ما بان.
So her brother was not happy and took his sister to the forest and tell her, stay here, I'm coming, and he didn't come.
حتى يجيها واحد الراجل راكب على واحد العبد داير عليه الحرير والبلاغي حيت هادشي كيبيعو، ويقول لها مالك اش طاري وعلاش كتبكي، وغيديها معاه وغيجيب لها واحد الحوض وغادي يذبحوه غادي يشويه ويقادو ويعطيه لها باش تاكل. وبقات هي كتاكل وتشرب حيت كان حار، كتاكل وكتشرب حتى غادي ترد داك الحنش اللي كلات.
So when she was in the forest, very unhappy, one man come selling many beautiful things and tell her, come with me. And when she comes with him, he present her
Sheep. It's like
a sheep, and she eat a lot, and after she spit out what was in her
Yeah,
Vomit.
Vomit.
ديك السيد فاش شافها وقفت هذيك الحنش شدو دارو في واحد القرعة وسد عليه وقال لها من اليوم انا غادي نتزوجك وغادي تولي مرتي.
And this man, when he saw the snake, he put it on a bottle and he said, I will marry you.
غدو لي وخوها غادي تلبي ليا وغيولي كيسة لكن دوما كانوا قبايل.
And time passed and her brother became very poor and he was
asking for money.
asking
The
for
people of
money
the
from
village.
door to door.
حتى غيجي فيها هي وغادي تخرج باش تعطيه الله وغتعرفو بلي هو خوها وغادي تقول لراجلها هذا راه خويا. قال لها دخلي ودخل الدار عطاتو وكلا وشرب الخمر وما عرفهاش.
And one time he opened it. She opened the door and it was her brother and she recognized him and he didn't recognize her and she asked him to go on and she gives him what to eating and take care of him and she told her husband, this is my brother.
ومن دخلوا قالت لولادها من نحطو الطقله ديال العشاء بقاو تقولوا لي حاجينا ماما حاجينا حاجين.
And she told to her children, she has children with her husband, and she told to her children, we are going to eat with this man, and when we will be together, tell me to tell you a story. Please, mom, tell us a story.
وهي غادي تبقى عليهم الحاجة علياجة باش خوها يعرف بلي راه هذيك اختو. هي كتعاود وهو كيتفكر اختو اش طرا ليها واش جرى ليها حتى غادي يعرفها بلي هي اختو. غير عرفها هو كيفقسها طاح ومات خصوصا بلي عرفها راه مرتو هي اللي وكلتها الحلج وبسببو طرا هادشي.
So when she began to tell the story, he recognized that this is her sister, and he was very unhappy because he knew what his wife do to his sister, and he was so sad that he died.
He killed himself.
ومن تما هي عاشت مع راجلها ووليداتها بسلام وحكايتي مشات من الواد للواد وبقيت انا وياكم مع ولاد الجواز. Thank you.
From that day, you can.
She lives happy with her children and her husband. And at the end of the story, we say, my story went from lakes to lakes. And me, I stay on the board.
Rona.
Hello.
Rona.
How do you say your name? Sabina. I didn't understand the word you said, but I could have listened to you all day. It's beautiful. Well, talking about compassion, I always instantly think of children. Well, you can see it later.
Sorry.
I always think of children when I think of compassion. So, sure. This is my bodyguard, yes. And his English is second to none. I actually think he probably exceeds me in his understanding of the English language because I'm Scottish. So it's a little bit different. When one of the first jobs I had when I decided to work with teenagers was at something called a PRU unit, which stands for Pupil Referral Units. Yeah, you'll be familiar.
Obviously.
So I expected it to be, a little bit different. I had no idea how different. I mean, I've got 5 children myself. I've got 6 grandchildren. I'm quite used to children misbehaving. I had never come across anything like this in my life. When I was asked to create the room where we were going to work with these young lads, and it would really, I think in the 12 years that I did this work, I only came across 2 girls. It generally was the boys who got chucked out of the class for their behaviour. But I was asked to create it, and they said, we'll create a womb room. I said, I don't think so. If we're dealing with teenage boys, I don't think we'll call it the womb room. I think we'll call it the cool room. So on the first day that I arrived, these young lads were already there. And there were 7 of them. There was 5 young white lads, all English, all Mancunians, and 2 young black lads who had been born in Manchester. So they were all English, and English was their first language. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. Violence was their first language. Because even as I walked into that place that had been especially created for them, the damage was already pretty horrific. There was holes kicked in the wall because these walls were made of, you know, like when they just put up a wall as a partition, they kicked holes through them. They were kicking holes out of each other. I mean, the behaviour was unbelievable. And if you take all the naughty boys and put them in the same place, what are you going to get? Well, they got me. And I was introduced by the young mentor who came in with me. And this young lad, one of the young black lads, was so handsome. He was in charge. That was obvious that he was number 1 in that crew because the other 6 were sat round him like you guys are now. You know, so everything that happened was whether or not this lad wanted it to happen. So I was going to have to win him over first. So the mentor comes in. And he says, and I won't use bad language, but I'll give you the equivalent of it in what I can say. The young mentor said, we've got a treat for you, lads. We've got the storyteller. And all of them looked at him, and he didn't even turn round. He said, effing storyteller? What do we want with an effing storyteller? We're not 5. Anyway, the one bad word that I will say is shit, because he said her stories are shit. Well, I've never had that before. You know, what do you do now? What do you say to this boy? So in Scotland, the word is not shit. So I just leaned across to him and I said it in a big loud voice, shite, son, the word is shite. It's a 5-letter word that has been bastardized by the English. Sir, she swore. She said a bad word. He said, no, bastardized is in the English language. It's in the dictionary. Look it up, boy, look it up. Well, he was absolutely stunned, this lad. He said, because I'm reasonably normal looking now, but when I go to work with these kids, I'm not at all. I've got on a black long wig, got black eye makeup, black nails, black paint and winkle pickers. I look quite witchy. Yeah, it's not difficult, you know, it's quite easy for me. And he's looking and he's thinking, what the hell have we got here? But he's interested now. So the rest of them haven't said a word. They're just looking, you know, what's happening next. I said, I'm going to tell you a story. Because that's why I'm here. This is my hobby. And I get paid for this. You know, green bags, folders. I can go and buy stuff, anything I like. I said, but I'm only going to tell you one story. Because if I don't tell a story here today, I won't get paid. Which is not true, obviously. He doesn't have to know that. And if I don't get paid, I can't go to the supermarket and take my shopping to the counter and say, well, I want to take this, but I don't have the money to pay for it because, what's your name? And he went, Jason. Well, that mentor nearly fainted because this boy had never spoken to anybody other than these other lads. I said, well, if I can't pay for that, I can't feed my children. And I've got 5 children. To 4 different fathers, but that's not your business. Well, my street cred just went, woo! She's one of us. I don't mention the adoption word. So I've got these boys now, and they are all just thinking, is she real? Is she a person? The reason I have to be like that is because I'm not yet one of them. But I can't be one of those, the establishment. I can't be a teacher or a mentor or anybody like that. My background is actually psychology. And I usually do half and half. Half the work that I do is storytelling in the schools, and the other half is working with these young kids that are damaged, oh, so badly damaged. This particular boy turns out to be very bright. I told them the story of the warrior, which you will all be familiar with, yeah. And at the end, there's exactly what you expect. In the beginning, they were all fidgety. You know, they couldn't sit still for a minute because they've never sat and listened for any more than a couple of minutes. And when it came to the bit where the two soldiers are parting and they're shaking hands, let me borrow you, Yasin, let me borrow you. So I took him, no, just sit there for a minute. Give that girl your phone. So this is the way we shake hands now. But back then, this was the very first handshake, and it was like this. So I got this boy, Jay, hold on, and I pulled him up, and then I hugged him, and I said, this war is, and it was like that. She's assaulting me. I said that was, the war would have been over then, had the younger of the two soldiers gone home and told the truth, which was that the older boy said, I don't want to kill you. You could be my brother. They had talked all night. You know the story. We will end this war now. It's over. And he threw his sword down the stream, and the young lad threw his sword down the stream. And if that's what had happened, and that boy had gone home and told the truth, that war may well have ended forever. But he didn't. He couldn't resist the opportunity to take the glory. So he went back and said he had killed the last man standing. And that war didn't take 5 minutes. It took a year for that story to travel back. And the war started up all over again. That young lad, Jason, first of all, the mentor said, when we stopped, the mentor said, oh, come on, boys, that deserves a round of applause. And that boy looked at him practically with contempt. Sir, we're contemplating. What? This boy who's been chucked out of mainstream school because he can't behave himself is using words like contemplating. I thought, hold on a minute, this boy's bright. This boy turned out to be very bright, extremely bright. He broke my heart because he was going to be 16 in June, so he wouldn't be going back into school in September. My job was to get these kids back into mainstream school, and I couldn't get him back. Talk about compassion. I could have chewed my own teeth out, seriously. I was so upset by this, because I knew that boy could have been anything. He could have been the guy who was going to, discover the cure for cancer. He could have done anything, this boy. We had a few battles, him and I. And I said to him one day, how did you end up in this unit? You are so clever, Jason, and you must know you're clever. He says, yeah, I know, I'm okay, smart. I said, well, how did you end up here? My teacher was racist. I said, don't give me that. I said, you went to Stretford High. 50% of the kids in your class are black. Why did she pick on you? She didn't like me. I said, so hold on a minute. So she was racist and she didn't like you. I liked you. Why wouldn't she like you? You're a great kid. When I saw the look on that boy's face, it was because he suddenly realized he was the master of his own demise. I says, you were the school clown, weren't you? You were the one that misbehaved and gave them all a laugh and drove your teacher insane. Where are those boys now? Well, the rage. You want me to say it, don't you? I said, yeah, I want you to say it. Where are they? They're still in school. It could have been all over for him. Except he was bright enough to know that it didn't have to be. I said to him, okay, you've messed up so far. It's not the end. You're not even 16 yet. You'll not be 16 for another couple of weeks. So what are you going to do now? He says, I don't know. I don't know. I says, well, you could go to night school. He says, I won't get in. He says, they won't take me. He says, it's finished for me at school. I said, it's not necessarily finished. I said, you could go to night school. So only about 3 weeks later, school broke up and he was gone. 3 years later, I'm in what I call the traffic centre. It's called the Trafford Centre in Manchester, which is a huge shopping mall. And I hear, Nurse, nurse. And I turned round and here's this boy dragging this woman who's his mum behind him.
Yeah.
Mum, this is a storyteller. He says, I never recognised you with your clothes on. And she went, what? I says, well, I usually dress a little bit strange in the classrooms, you know. He said, she said, are you the one that used to tell them the stories? He used to come home every day and tell us the stories that you had told him, but not just the children, the adults as well. We'd all be sat like this listening. She says, it was brilliant. Never mind that, Mum. Tell her where I'm going. You tell her. No, tell her where I'm going. Tell her yourself. Sorry. He says, I'm going to college. If he was the only one that had happened to, it would have been enough. But over the 12 years, there was a lot like Jane. But I never came across another one that was just as clever as he was. He was absolutely incredible, what that boy knew. And someday, somewhere, we will hear his name again. But another 2 years have passed, and I'm in the classroom one day, and one of the teachers come running through. She says, have you heard what happened to Jason? And I won't tell you secondly. I thought, he came from Moss Side, which is a really, really dangerous part of Manchester. And I thought, he's been shot or stabbed or something's happened to him, something horrible. She says, no, she says they had a poetry contest for Black History Month, and he won. And his poetry is up in the university. And I was like, yes, that's the journey. It has started. So we wait and we will see where Jason will end up, but it will be somewhere up there. So, but the compassion in that boy, when he realized himself, because we've talked about this, he'd let his mother down. He'd let his father down. He'd let his siblings down. He had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. And when he suddenly realized that he was responsible for his own ending in the school, he suddenly took up and took notice. And I'm just waiting to see what the next chapter is in his life, because it will be something special. But you know, you always come along and you think you're ready to tell what you're going to tell. And then something happens and change your mind. Jim's story earlier on just about blew me off my stool. It could have been talking about me. My oldest, my firstborn, was absolutely perfect until the minute he was born, and he was a forceps delivery, and it went wrong, and his brain was damaged with the force of the forceps. And baptized, said to my father, over my dead body, baptized. I'll give you baptized. Why would he do that to me, a young mother who's never done any harm to anybody? Why would he do this to my son? You want me to still believe? Unbeknownst to me, my father took my son and baptized him at the kitchen sink. When I found out, I was furious. I was biting my own teeth, as I said. I couldn't believe it. I said, Daddy, you had no right to do that. It says I had a duty. My father was always right. That's what really hacked me off. I never got the chance to be right when he was still alive. But my parents were blind as well, so I had a very unusual upbringing, you know, compared to what you would consider as the norm. But when my son, I can't even begin to describe him. He's 56 years old now. He plays for Manchester United's disability team, and he's been playing for them for 18 years. And he thinks he's Cristiano Ronaldo. He gets pictures taken and he signs them. He gives them to people. His language is incredible. His comprehension is practically zero. He doesn't understand half of what he's saying, but he talks like a Philadelphia lawyer. And when he's doing the pundits for the television, if I said he can actually make it better than the ones who are actually doing it, I would not be telling a lie. So one thing that he understands is football. It's been his life. It's everything he's ever loved. But what took me from there to realizing that if that happened with my son, why wouldn't it happen with other children that are born with a disability of any kind? So one of the jobs that I do is I work with young mums who've had the tragedy for them of their child being born with something not quite right. You know, and I hope that I give them some hope that it doesn't have to be like that. You know. And I feel that once people have a better understanding of why things happen, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
If you're a believer, and I'm a believer. And I think it must be very difficult for people who don't have a faith to have something to hold on to. So, and to me, faith is all about compassion, about understanding, about helping people to overcome any kind of tragedy or mishap or whatever. So, got another change.
A little while, haven't we? I wanted to come up to.
Yeah.
I wanted to listen to that thing you saying about that with similar experience and how you connect with people when you first get in the room. That kind of. Do you want to?
How do I connect with some people when I first get in?
Yeah, it was just kind of relating that because in the sense of this being masterclass, I think the thing that you highlighted about it being really important to connect and be not because you're not one of them and you can't be one of the others, and that's again similar experience that I've had working in groups that
Yeah.
you have to go in and be something different, and that immediate almost a shock, isn't it? Was the thing that connects, I think feels
I
really
think for
important.
the children, by the time I get them, I'm not used to talking when I'm sitting down. I come from a big family and you only got heard if you stood up and down. My experience of that is if you have anything to fear, and the children are filled with fear, the fear of nothing.
Yeah.
You know, because they've had these unfortunate experiences, they don't expect anything to be right.
Yeah.
And every stranger is a danger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's how you see everybody is. I don't know you, I might not want to know you, you're going to have to do something good here before you'll convince me. You know, they've got all this angst and anger and everything all mixed up. The thing that got me most, and I think our education system in the UK has got to be probably the worst in the world. It's absolutely dreadful. When I go in and work with the teenagers, they have learned nothing because they haven't connected. They're not interested. They don't want to know what that would do me any good. I'm never going to get a job. Nobody in my family's ever had a job. You know, we've always lived on benefits and we're quite happy to carry on doing that. And there is some real talent that's getting missed because of that. But how I feel when I walk into a room and I've met with a group of young people, whether they're that young or teenagers about to leave school, they've got to know that I'm there for them.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they have to know, is that I'm there for them.
Yeah.
And when I'm working with the kids that are quite, like I've described today, you know, these boys not bouncing off the walls and bouncing off each other, is a little bit more difficult to engage with them.
Yeah.
So you have to do something really quite different. You have to look different for the start.
Mm.
You don't have to go and looking like a witch like I do, but it works.
Yeah.
It works because they know instantly that there's a reason for this. Something in their mind is telling them why is she weird? Why does she look like that? And I'm there to connect with you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm here to connect with you. I want to hear your story. I want to know what's happened to you and why you're here. Because that education system that allows that to happen is absolutely outrageous. There's a class of, say, the one thing is, I mean, when I went to school, there was 49 kids in my class. 49. One teacher, 49 kids. That's quite a job. But that was because by the time we went to school, we already knew that this was somebody that had to be respected. This was somebody who was there to do something for me. My behaviour. I mean, one of the things that I use when I'm working with the young people, or when I'm doing a workshop in particular, I'll draw a dot in the middle of an A1 page on a flip chart or something. And that dot is me. And then all around me, there's other dots. That's my parents, my siblings, my aunts and uncles, the neighbours in the community, the police, the doctors, the teachers, all of these people. So I'm so protected and people are concerned about me, and I don't know that when I'm 5 years old. But when I'm 15 years old and I haven't had that, I haven't had those people around me to protect me. You know, and it's not only that, you learn these are people that you have to show an element of respect to. The teacher, the doctor, the policeman, these are all people who have earned the respect of their position. Well, there isn't anything like that now. Children don't get taught anything. And they're from there all the way through school. They'll go into school and they'll get the usual curriculum, but they don't get anything that they really need to know. And it's quite difficult for children to trust.
Yeah.
So let's talk about stories and how that works, because you know that's the theme of this workshop.
Well, the stories that I then tell those children, it has to be something that they can relate to.
Yeah.
It has to be something that's relatable to them. So if I told them Cinderella, for example, it would mean nothing to them. Because they saw that as a child or heard it as a child, and it's just a little fairy tale, doesn't mean nothing. So they have to hear a story where people do something for somebody else, or there's a connection between the people in the story that they haven't had or haven't felt. And then they can begin to understand why they feel the way they do. These kids are all very angry, really angry inside. And that's why they do all these naughty things, you know. And sometimes it's because they're just bored, frankly, you know. So you have to find a way to connect with them.
I think,
Story makes a big, big impact on them because they've never had it before.
yeah.
That's the first thing. They've never
Yeah,
been told stories. So when they get told the story, because somebody said to me, oh, you'll never get their attention. They don't listen for 2 minutes. I said, I will get their attention. Of course I will. I said, that's what I'm here for. That's what I do. And one teacher, I mean, I used to sometimes come at, you've probably had this yourselves, you come across people who are not very happy because you've managed to teach these kids that they couldn't do a thing with. And a lot of it is practice as well, and learning as you go. I learned as I went, you know, I picked up things as I went along. But the reason why story is important is because they can relate to them. They can relate to the stories, or the stories that I choose to tell them, in a way. And it's usually one of the things we did when it came to the nativity at the time of the year of Christmas, when Christmas carols or whatever, and they do a nativity play. In one of the schools, these kids had never had anything like that. They've never had any drama or anything. You just got the usual curriculum stuck down their throat that they weren't interested in and didn't listen to, and that's why nothing ever got better. And I said, well, we're going to do a play. We're going to do the nativity play. And the teacher looked at me and she said, are you mad? You're never going to let those boys. Do you think you're going to put those boys to get up on the stage and make a fool of themselves? I says, no, I think I'm going to get these boys up on the stage and make them have a bit of fun. And she said, the nativity. I said, yeah, but it's going to be a little bit different. I says, the baby that we're waiting for is going to be the greatest footballer that ever lived. I says, and the three wise men are going to be Eric Cantona, David Beckham, and somebody else. And she looked at me as if I was mad. Well, I did. I got those boys on that stage to do a play. Not one of them remembered all of the words, but they had an absolute ball, and they walked off with their chests like this, you know, everybody's cheering. It was mad, it was crazy, but it was fun. And they loved it. So you need to find something that they can enjoy and that they can connect with, and then that's it, you've brought them in. Now, if I'm walking through Manchester,
Well, I think another,
thank God,
another,
sorry, I just want to say, thank God they're waving to me from the street and not from behind bars, because
Yeah.
that's where they will end up if they don't get that intervention. Sorry, Jim.
that's- I think one of the things we've been speaking about before is that the stories need to be resonant, but not preaching,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, creating that space.
Yeah, nobody, child or adult, wants to be lectured to say this is what you should do. This is the right way to behave.
Mhm.
Even no matter how much we know we're right.
Yeah.
And so part of the challenge with healing stories is to find something that you trust will resonate with them without being the specific story that is going to teach them the lesson they need to learn.
Yeah.
Because that's where you fall on the face.
And I think that's,
Yeah,
just
sorry.
sort of speak a little bit about my experience of that. So in the same way as you kind of go, I am happy when I go into a classroom and the first thing I hear is people swearing at me, because I'm like, these are my people, all of this stuff is out there. That's great. I'm autistic, so direct is brilliant. But that thing of finding the story that connects instantly. And when I was listening to you, I was thinking, and we talked a bit about, you talked a bit about respect, but actually being there and going, I'm being paid to tell you a story and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to have enough respect for you to tell you that. And often I find that these kids have been disrespected so much. It's almost, that's how they don't know. That's why they're not respectful. They've not had respect modeled to them by that community in the way we talk about. So yeah, it's showing respect for who they are and where they are and doing your job for them. And that thing you were saying about often, like, you get paid for this. So there's something about money that, particularly in that,
Well,
that's
that's
thing
it.
they
That's all they're
respect, isn't
about.
it?
It's all they're concerned about.
And that's, and on honouring that is meeting them where they are. And then you can, like, you have that space to make those stories where they can see themselves in it and relate to it. Feels really important.
Interesting. When talked earlier about stories that get you, that we can't talk about without that moment. That's one of the, this is that story. There's a book I read a long time ago. I never had a chance to tell it or anything, called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. And it's about the worst family in the entire neighborhood, the school, the ones who misbehave, etc. And they are commandeered, pushed into doing the Christmas pageant. And the narrator of the stories was saying, oh yeah, this is the worst family. This is going to be something. And at the end of it, yes, the whole play is a shambles. Everything's, but the woman who's playing Mary stands out in front of everybody, waving the Jesus around like a football. But yelling the words, hey, unto you a child is born. And that moment in the story gets me now.
Yeah.
Always will. Because, hey, I'm here.
Yes.
And so when you mentioned about the football players and everything like that, I'm back to that book, and it's called The Best Pageant Ever or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Anyone else? Yes,
Yes.
please.
For example, if you are going to a school, a class, and you have, let's say, 45 minutes, and this is about the length we do in Estonian, then you see the children there, and you probably can guess that they're really a very large variety of different experiences that they live in. Someone is really a very good buller, someone is really bullying the other, someone is, let's say, has many fears. There is something, let's say, children from the not very wholesome families, like not a full family. So how do you make a choice of stories? Because when you're limited with time, and you know that certain stories will work with some of them, certain stories will inspire some of them. Well, how do you make this choice when there is such a great variety and you can't meet them regularly? I don't know if you.
So it's a one-off.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, definitely been in that situation. I mean, for me, it's a gut feeling. I mean, as Jim said, the story that follows you. It's a thing of trusting your instinct. I mean, if you're used to working with those kind of kids, your instincts will hone. There's a way of honing it. But I think it's walking into that space, being authentic and open for yourself, taking in what's around you, and just making a decision and going, this is the path I'm going with. But a lot of it is about, as Rose and I talked about, how you connect when you first step in the room. It's that getting that respecting them. I'm here to do a job. That will get as many. There may be situations where you're not going to get everybody, but it's like making that initial choice and being clear about it, and having that respect when you step in, having that respect for them to be honest about, I'm here, this is what I'm doing, and making that connection. I think.
There's one thing I never told you though at the end. When I finished telling that story to the lads, the warriors, and I picked up my bag and I went to leave, and no, tell us another story, Oh no. First rule of showbiz, keep them wanting more. I said, I'll come back next week, provided you guys have behaved yourself, because me being here has been a treat for you, hasn't it? And they all looked at one another because they weren't quite sure whether we're supposed to say yes or no. If I say yes, and the rest of them going to go, whoop,
Yeah.
And they all simultaneously went, yeah, we want you to come back. I says, right, well, if you guys behave yourself, I'll come back next week. But with that question that you gave about what stories to tell, to me, doesn't matter. They will enjoy the story, because children love story. Children do what they see and they say what they hear. And the problem that we have, certainly in the UK now, I don't know where it is, where everybody else is. In the UK now, the problem we have is children do what they see, which is, or they say what they hear, which is, they're not, when I was a youngster, the first thing I heard in the morning, my mother was in the kitchen making breakfast. And at dinner time, we all sat around the table. It's still a ruling in my family now, and thankfully my kids have carried it on with their families. When you eat together and you talk about what happened in the day. Television doesn't come on until well after dinner is all over. No phones. When my grandkids, I mean, my grandchildren are 25, 19, all the way down, right? You come into my house, telephone gets left on the console table in the hall. Sometimes they try and sneak it in their back pocket, and if I see there's a phone, I'm glad, phone, we're here to talk. Get that phone next pocket. Children just love I won't say attention, because that sounds as if they're craving the attention. They love the intimacy.
Yeah.
The story of whoever's telling it. I mean, I've tried this as an experiment to tell them a pretty rubbishy story, but they're still there. They're still, when I say rubbishy, I mean not a lot of action. But that's what children enjoy, is the emotional attachment. We call it emotional literacy. In one occasion, I mean, are you quite new to telling? Is that why you're asking this? A long time, but well, you're probably already doing what you're doing well, or you wouldn't still be doing it.
I'm just wondering, what's your choice with how you
Yeah.
personally do that?
Yeah.
Story
Yeah.
to you're
We're
not
all
navigating
different. I think
yourself.
we're all different. Yeah,
Yeah.
we do have different ways of doing things. But the other thing that I found is my sister-in-law once sent me a birthday card, and every time I think about it, I still laugh. But it's actually a pretty tragic message that's on this card. And it's a woman with a baby. and she's pushing the stroller or the pram in front of her, and she's holding something up, going like this. And you know, you would normally do Gucci, Gucci, Gucci to a baby. She's going Gucci, Gucci, Gucci to handbag. And I thought, oh my God, because that is so true to life today. For young people, it's all about appearance, visuals, you know, all this reality TV and stuff. They've got to look perfect. They're all looking for perfection. It doesn't exist. Perfection belongs up there, you know. And young people who strive for the attention of other people is because they haven't had it. Every child is still saying, give me a boy till he's 7 and I'll give you the man. It's just saying, give me a girl till she's 5 and I'll give you the woman. It's what happens in their early years is what's most important. And if we've got a chance to make a difference with that by being the storyteller that comes into the school, and we give them that emotional literacy, it stays with them forever.
Jim, what's your take going into that one-off situation?
I think it's very similar to yours. I just want to have the biggest active repertoire I can, and then trust what comes to me. And sometimes I've had the experience even of telling a story and have it twist underneath me as I tell it. And I'm just going to trust that and say, well, this is what needed to be heard at this moment.
Yeah.
One of the differences for me, again, working more with older populations, is I use a lot of space in my stories, which some kids are not going to be comfortable with. But I'll tell a story and I'll sit and wait. And then I might ask a question and it evolves from that. So it's a different modality than, and I still think that's healing, but it's an age thing that people are older people, you know, 20.
Ancient.
I mentioned we were in a school yesterday and I asked the kids how old they were. They were 10.
Yeah.
And the fellow was working with me, said, how old do you think he is? They had 100 guesses. He was 28. How old am I? And all eyes. You know. I was everywhere from 61 to 100.
The other thing that you might want to do to beef things out a bit, if you like, is not just tell the story, but then have an activity to go with it.
Yeah.
One of my favourites is tell a spider story and then get the kids to draw a spider's web. It's absolutely hysterical. Nobody can draw a spider's web. They all end up like umbrellas. You know, if you try now to sit down and draw a spider's web, it takes a little bit of thought, you know. And then we'll do the spider dance. So we need 8 legs for the spider dance. So we get 4 kids to become the spider. That kind of thing. If you enjoy it, you remember it, it's fun.
It's sort of noticing what you're doing that they're responding to and being flexible enough to build on that. You know, like you say, if you do a spot and you see someone responding to that, it's like, okay, well, let's do more of that. You know, it's where find, as you tell, you find your connections. And then you can like find what's working and then work on that. And like, I think there was just one more topic, in terms of if you're going into a school and it's just once, the teacher and the teaching assistants, them being engaged is really important. It really struck me when you said they do what they see and what they hear. And I have literally, as I've been telling, had teachers talk over me to tell the children something, to listen to me. I'm like, you're talking over me and you're telling them to not talk over me. So actually, if you can get there early enough to have that connection teacher and impress to them about like, they're going to model what you do. So you can't be at the back doing the marking or talking to somebody else. I need you to be engaged, because then if they're looking to you for reference, they're going to be engaged as well. So having that connection before you go in, particularly for one-offs, can be really important. Yeah.
So I'd like to say we're rapidly running out of time.
We are, yes.
And I want to first of all invite one last set of questions before we wrap up. And then I think,
Just
go ahead.
Just one thing I'll add to what was said before. I very, very rarely do one-offs, because what I noticed in the beginning, if I'm only going into the school to tell a story and then I'm leaving and hoping somebody else is going to phone me up and say, come back, it doesn't happen. So what I started to do was I found a reason for being in that school, for telling stories and showing them why it made a difference. I use rubrics when I'm doing storytelling in schools so that I can show and prove where the differences are being made. The child who couldn't sit still for 5 minutes now sits engaged, or the child who wouldn't speak up now speaks up. But that takes time, over time. I mean, you've been doing it for a while already, I presume. Yeah, a long time. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with making change if you feel you want to. It sounds to me as if you're looking to do something else. Maybe we could have a conversation about that sometime.
So final question then, and then we have to finish. Anything else you guys wanted to ask before we wrap up?
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, thank you,
Sure.
thank you people that are watching online as well. And if you've got any other questions, I'm going to be hanging around for a bit afterwards. So if there's stuff that you want to know, yeah, and we hope we'll see you again at the festival. And I am telling Tales and Tunes is an open mic that I run every month on the first Wednesday of the month online. That if you're here in Morocco, you can watch it on that screen there, and you can join in quite soon. So if I don't see you before, then I hope I'll see you from around the world. But let's thank Jim. Thank you. See you all again soon. Bye. Bye. Bye.
You okay, Dee? You feeling up?
Thanks,
Enjoying
Connie.
Thank you. You enjoying it?